Well, welcome to A Stranger, Suitcase and a Story. I'm Anton van der Walt, and with me is my co-host, Ben Liebenberg. Hello, Ben. How are you doing?
Hey, Anton, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. It's great to have you here. This podcast is where we unpack the real stories of migration, identity, and belonging. Whether you've made the leap thinking about it or simply curious, you're in the right place. Each story reveals what we hold on to, what we leave behind, and what we find along the way. Today, we join someone whose journey brings new heart and perspective to it all. Now, I'm going to introduce our guest in a moment. I was thinking about it, reflecting on we've done a number of episodes now, and I was thinking, what are the guests telling us? What are the kind of themes that are coming out? It's a really good reflection, especially if somebody picks this particular podcast we're doing today. I think some of the stuff that we're seeing, belonging and identity, comes out quite strong. You often hear people saying, I still feel like a stranger even if I blend in. Also the emotional baggage and what we carry. There's often memories of hopes and family pressures, and often people talk about what they brought with it. A theme that comes through quite a lot is courage of starting over. Today's guest, there's no question that we'll talk about the courage it takes to start over, and it's not always heroic. It's often lonely and quiet, and the loss of letting go. So sometimes we have stories of grief or losing what once gave life to structure. And then humor and culture. We had I don't know if you remember, Ben, one of our first people that we interviewed did all sorts of jobs, and one of them was in a bar, and he was a teetotaler. So it was quite interesting to hear that. Nearly every guest shares memories where they feel the privilege of a new life, and I think that was the one thing that struck me quite a bit, was this mindset of gratitude and perspective, and a lot about adaptability. You remember that Kevin talked about making it work, where Francia was more in, you're in Australia now, so you're not somewhere else, you're here. And then the support systems and paying it forward. Often guests talk about how much the reason why they come onto the pod is because they want to share their story, but also to help other people. Often we talk about parenting in a new country, and together with freedom and safety, those two things go together, where often the guests talk about how relaxed they feel when they come here. They have this thing where they feel a little bit safer, freer, and even if it's in an unfamiliar society, and almost every guest talk about the beautiful beaches, the solo walks, and the lack of fear signal is a turning point for them. One theme that comes through is this visa story, where there's often long delays and in limbo. And perhaps the last thing which was so profound is this whole storytelling thing. We created this pod, Ben, Stranger, a Suitcase and a Story, and it's the story that actually brings out so much. You might recall that even I shared a much deeper story last time. So these are the themes that I'm seeing. Is that a sort of accurate reflection? What do you think, Ben?
Yeah, absolutely. Same from my side. That's what I feel as well.
Yep. So our guest today, I want to introduce John Chan. John came to Australia probably 8 years ago or so, and he moved to Australia and worked a little bit here, but then started his own business as an entrepreneur, exploring opportunities. I suppose he couldn't have picked a better time than in the middle of COVID, right? And so he did that. So we'll talk about the courage. But he came across for his family, and he took kids and his wife, and he came across for development opportunities. As I said, born in PE school and then worked in Joburg. And so, John, welcome to our podcast. And Ben and I are really looking forward to having a great conversation with you.
Yeah, Anton, Ben, thank you for the opportunity. And I think some of the things that you've just touched on now in your little synopsis of the episodes that you had resonates, because I've been here almost 8 years, my 8th year now, and it hasn't been plain sailing. But despite it all, I've welcomed quite a few people from South Africa, some very close friends and some acquaintances from either my kids' school or whatever, who've either come and emigrated here or have come and done a recce, those kinds of things. And I've met with them because I think there's some kind of, maybe I won't call it altruistic, but it's almost, I've walked this path and I've learned some hard lessons along the way in the 8 years. And I'm hoping that if I had to just give them some no-hold barred, like kind of advice, maybe it'll smooth their path for them. There was a couple who decided this wasn't for them. I think some of the advice that I gave them wasn't necessarily that they mustn't. It was just really this is what you're going to be up against versus the life that you have currently in South Africa.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that it's a human thing, and where you say, what have I got to lose to help somebody else? Because if I've walked a path, then somebody else don't have to make the mistakes that I've made. They can make their own new mistakes, right?
Yeah.
But John, I want to take you jumped into the middle of it, and I like that. And so we'll come back to some of the stuff. And
Sure.
But the thing that interests me a lot, you say you were born in Port Elizabeth in South Africa, but do you know a little bit about what generation you were there in South Africa and where your ancestors came from? I assume from China.
Yeah, okay. I'm third generation South African born Chinese. Both sets of my grandparents came in the early 1920s from Canton, so I'm Cantonese in terms of my ethnicity in terms of Chinese. And they really came to escape war and communism and things like that. They came to the promised land, or what seemed like the promised land. And I'll probably touch on it a bit later, thinking about them emigrating to Port Elizabeth at that time. Obviously, there's no flights, no airplanes, so they had to arrive by ship. And them coming, not actually being able to speak English. And they didn't actually have any skills like we have skills now. So they didn't go to university. They might have gone to school so they could count and read, but in another language. And no network, no wealth, no capital to draw on to be able to make a start. They had what they could carry with them, and they came by themselves. So I think a lot of that was meant to happen then was they were meant to go and work in the gold mines and things like that. But my grandparents didn't do that. Instead, they did what a lot of first generation Asian immigrants do here. And it's not necessarily just Asian. It could be from European countries that I see here. They had some skills that could buy something and then sell something, right? So they opened general dealerships. On my father's side, he had 7 brothers. My dad was the second youngest. Only one brother finished school, which was the youngest one, in Grahamstown. So they lived around Grahamstown in those days. My dad, I think he made it to high school, which he actually did in Johannesburg, but then he came back to Port Elizabeth. On my mother's side, there were 3 children. My mother was the eldest. She was the only daughter. And being as it was in those times, she didn't make it into high school. My grandparents were more like, there's no career for females. You, as soon as you can read and write, need to come help us in the store. And, that was their lot in life. And they managed to go through almost 60 years married now, over 60 years married now, still kicking and screaming in Port Elizabeth. My dad just celebrated a birthday a few days ago. He's 86 now. And they did very much what their parents did, right? So they also opened their own businesses. So I guess we'll talk about entrepreneurship a little bit later. I've seen it all my life, so maybe I was destined to be my own boss in another form.
Buying and selling, right?
Yeah, same thing. Build up slowly, save for a rainy day, treat your suppliers well because they can treat you well, treat your customers well because you don't know when you're going to see more of them. So I was one of 3 brothers. My brothers are 11 and 13 years older than me. We did what I guess my generation of Chans, if you will, so all my cousins included, we all managed to get through school. The majority of us managed to get through university, including my own family. And I guess it's one of those things that has always stood with me. And part of the reason why we moved to Australia, there's multiple reasons. It's that idea of the next generation needs to be better off than the previous generation. Mm-hmm. And so we had education. So despite the trials and tribulations of the times that we grew up in, obviously my parents were right in the middle of apartheid, and myself and my brothers as well. Growing up in that time, there were very few options for schools, and then also university we managed to get in, but also mainly because not so much myself and my brothers really, they got bursaries. They were sponsored their way in, so they couldn't be denied or anything like that. And yeah, grew up in Port Elizabeth, went to school there, to a Catholic school. My parents are pretty staunch Catholics. My dad actually got a commendation from 2 popes ago for the work that he did in the community.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and I grew up in the church. Too much to my dad's disappointment. I'm a bit of a retired Catholic at the moment. But our schooling was all through the Catholic schools. And again, in those days, I guess those were the schools that were willing to let us in.
So did you guys go to boarding school? Sorry to interrupt. Did you guys go to boarding school or not?
So my brothers grew up in Grahamstown, and so St. Andrews was one of the boarding schools. They didn't go to boarding school, however. There was the option, but my mother was quite protective over us, so we stayed at home. And yeah, and then we all went through to UPE. My middle brother went to UCT, University of Cape Town, and then all left Port Elizabeth basically as soon as we graduated to have our careers in Johannesburg, Dallas, Chicago, a little bit of London, and now in Sydney, across all of our brothers, I should say.
So I'm really interested to know a little bit about growing up in South Africa for you in the Eastern Cape. What was your childhood like, and how did you experience South Africa growing up there?
Yeah, for me, it was great. I didn't know anything better, right? So because of the apartheid system, we all had to live in one neighborhood. But that was great. Like every night, I can count on two hands the number of families that I could count as like extended families of ours, where we'd play street cricket until late at night, and then one of the aunties would call us over for dinner, or at least call their children in. And then if my parents weren't home at that time, which was possible because they worked late jobs, I'd go over there and I'd have dinner, maybe even get bathed or showered or whatever, and then return home just across the street. So in a very Chinese neighborhood, it wasn't always like that across South Africa. So I know my wife is also Chinese South African, and she grew up in Johannesburg. It wasn't the same. The Chinese were very dispersed across Johannesburg. But for me, it was great, just living amongst your own culture. And I'm sure we'll touch on that a little bit, but I guess you talked about longing and belonging and things like that. For us, the community was so small. By the time they did a census in 1994, obviously, when Nelson Mandela was released and the new government took over, at that stage, there were 20,000 South African Chinese, which is tiny, right? Very small. Yeah, tiny. And so from a belonging point of view, I'm definitely Chinese, and I'm proud of that cultural background that I have, but I don't speak Cantonese. I don't speak Mandarin.
Did you ever go back to your ancestral home?
It wasn't even something that my parents did, right? So my dad had some estranged sisters that lived in China, but he never met them. And it's never really been a massive calling for me, to be honest. Yeah, it's not something that I've done.
Yeah.
I've thought about, yeah.
So let's fast forward a little bit. It's quite interesting, John. I asked you a pretty innocuous question about what generation Chinese were you in South Africa, and look where we've gone to.
Yeah.
So this podcast is about all of that. So it's about finding those stories and talk about them. And it's fascinating if you think about the history and the things and how you grew up. I know I grew up in South Africa. I'm a bit older than you, and of course we grew up and there was always Chinese takeaways, right? So those 20,000 Chinese did their thing way back, right?
Yeah.
So let's tell us a little bit about your decision to come to Australia, and what made you do that, and then what was the route that you took?
Yeah, so I think like many South Africans that I've met, I think the final straw was my in-laws being attacked at home in 2009. My eldest child was just turned a year. So we lived in Sandton in South Africa, and so did my in-laws. And they got violently attacked in their family home of 23 years in Morningside, Sandton. And I think that was the night when the decision was made that we would explore leaving South Africa. Unfortunately, my in-laws moved out to a smaller place, but 2 months later it happened again, where they were attacked again. And my parents, being shopkeepers and having their businesses in townships and poorer socioeconomic areas, had numerous robberies, but never anything as violent as my in-laws experienced. And I think that was the shock, right? And then plus, I'll remember it clearly, we were having dinner, and my mother-in-law phoned and said, look, we've been attacked, come over. And it was about 6:30 in the evening, normally the time that my 1-year-old daughter is supposed to go to bed. And I was thinking, man, we're going out there and we've got our daughter with us, and this is not probably the way it should be. And we put the wheels into motion. My in-laws, so my father-in-law, mother-in-law, brother-in-law, and sister-in-law, this was in 2009, put their expressions of interest to come through to Australia. They applied using an agent. And so did we. So by 2009, we had all our documentation, etc. My brother-in-law and my in-laws and my then sister-in-law, who was still a dependent, so she was also a Latlamiki, so she was quite young then, still finishing school. They managed to get their visas approved, and I think my brother-in-law was over in 6 months, basically. And my in-laws basically came and went because they still had a business in South Africa, and we were at the mercy of the process. We were told it was 6 months. It wasn't, but by then, in that time period, I was busy doing my MBA. It was the first year of a 2-year program. And then in the second year, and so that was 2010, I'd completed it. By 2011, I'd moved jobs to South African breweries, and that distracted me. By then, my wife also decided she wanted to do her MBA, so that's another 2 years. Mm-hmm. So that takes us to 2013. We knew we had the application in, but we hadn't heard anything, but we didn't push it because we weren't ready because of just where we were in our personal lives and careers. And then when my wife got her MBA, she also started a new job. Yeah, that kind of distracted her, although that part of her getting the job was pretty much by design because she took a job with Time Bank, which then was a subsidiary of CBA here in Australia. So there was method to the madness. And so around late 2015, 6 years had passed now, we were like, okay, now what's going on? By then, my second child was 5 years old. And so we inquired, and over the years we inquired to see where we were, but we got a standard answer. The skills shortage list has changed. It changes every year or every 6 months, and your skills have gone down, but just be patient. So we did. But then we realized actually things weren't going to get better on that front, and we weren't getting any younger, and we were starting to feel the pressure of the windows closing. We were approaching 40 years old. And so we really needed to make a move. So we restarted the process, went with another agent, went with my wife's, this time with her skill set. And by mid 2016, probably 6 months after we had finished the paperwork and things like that, we got the call to say, okay, go do your medicals, which is basically we're in.
Wow. So if I can just ask, so what did you guys, I was just thinking about it when you spoke about it, but I actually came over on a skills visa, but I think my wife had more points than I had, so we really came over on her points.
Yeah,
because she's quite well qualified. But what did you guys study?
Yeah, so I did an undergraduate in IT and business, but the complexity around that was that I didn't stay in IT. So when I moved to Nedbank straight after university, I did one and then I moved out. And so I did 9 years of what you would call as an internal management consultant. And that's the skill that was selected to come into Australia because it happened to be on the skill shortage list.
All right.
Now, I didn't know it then, but since I came into the market in 2018 when I got here and started entering the job market, management consultants isn't a scarce skill, all right? There's a lot of people. And so 2015, what we did was we came in on my wife's skills, which was we looked at the list and it was IT project management. Now, she hadn't done project management for 4 or 5 years before then, but it doesn't matter. It got us in, and we actually got in on a state-sponsored visa. So we were meant to go to South Australia, so to Adelaide for 2 years. And when we landed, actually the year before we came, we went to Adelaide to have a look to see if we could live there. And yes, we could live there. It's just like Port Elizabeth. However, it's not necessarily, I left it for a reason.
No, that's what Ben and I are telling ourselves. There were so many places in Australia that feel similar to South Africa. And I was sitting wondering if you're going to say it, and there you did.
And yeah, I mean, it's great, but there was a risk that we would either be underemployed or we wouldn't be employed because the job market is very small.
Yeah. John, just to let you know, when we came over, the first city that we went to was Adelaide because I had a mate there, and that was just by chance. He organised a job for me there. And he picked us up from the airport and was driving to his place towards the beach area there. And as we were driving, we just looked at each other and go, man, this is Port Elizabeth, isn't it? And he said, yep, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's great. Now that I look back, and affordability would have been great. However, we met another Chinese South African who had moved there more, my wife's friend. She's a doctor. And she also came in on a state-sponsored visa, and she never left after 20 years. And I think in many ways, while she wasn't unhappy, in fact, she was very happy, this friend of ours, I just didn't want that to be. We made the decision that when we landed in Australia, we'd go straight to Sydney. And we could defend it if anyone had to query why that happened. And no one did, by the way. And that's because all of our family was here. So my wife's extended family is all here. And so they wouldn't have denied us that. So I guess if we want to talk about it, and hopefully people who are listening, maybe they would take something from this. Our agent said, he's very good. He said, you could go there and take a rental for a few months and try and apply for some jobs. More than likely, you probably won't get any, but then that's proof enough to go, look, we tried. And we couldn't live our savings, etc. And so we had to go to the biggest city, which is what we did.
Yeah, so that's how you started the process in about 2015 and you landed in 2017. When was that? End of 2017 or what time frame was that?
Yeah, so I think the catalyst to go, because obviously once you land, so we landed and stamped our passport, I think around end of 2016. So that gave us 5 years to then make the move permanent. However, at that time, I'm not sure you guys probably were here, but that's when South African Brewers was being bought out by AB InBev. So the world's biggest brewers buying the second. And I took the opportunity then to exit the business at the beginning in February of 2017. And then I consulted for a bit, but the point was that, okay, this is it. I'm about to hit 40, so let's go. And so I took the time while I was not working to wrap up affairs, so to speak, sell the car, sell the house, do everything that we needed to do, organize containers, get movers, get everything ready. And December 16, 2017, we boarded the plane, one-way ticket to Sydney.
Yeah, that's great. So tell us a little bit about you arriving here. How did you experience it? What made you feel like, oh, this is really nice? And what made you feel like, oh my goodness, I don't know if I can do this?
Yeah. So I'd probably been to Sydney probably 3 or 4 times previously, but I was very cognizant that when I was here, that was on a holiday, right? So your eyes wide open, you're just seeing the great things. You're on holiday and the weather's amazing. I always came in summertime, go to the beach until 9 p.m., etc. And it was no different when we landed, even though it was a little bit more stressful because by that stage, we had already organized the kids into primary school. We had organized a rental ahead of time. So we had a place to land.
How did you get that right, John? Most people that'll come on this podcast or who we speak to cannot organize a rental ahead of time. How did you do that?
So we came in August of 2017. So we flew December. And we came, and the reason why we came was because my wife had managed to organize a couple of interviews with people at CBA that she'd managed to network with. Because remember, she was working at Time Bank.
Right.
And so she'd made contact with some people. So that, and then we also took time then to interview schools to see where we were going to go. So we chose schools first before neighborhood. Some people go neighborhood and then what's the school? So we chose the school and we decided on a school in Putney in Sydney. And then because it was a public school, we had to obviously find a place in the neighborhood. And so we scoured everywhere for rentals and we found an apartment that came up. And we managed to secure it because, one, we had an address here because her parents and her brother was here already. So we used that as the address to domicile so that they could say, look, there is some kind of presence, it's not a risk. And at that stage, she was in the process of getting job offers. So while she didn't have anything concrete, we could say with some confidence that we were going to get a job. However, I think the biggest thing is that's August, right? So we said we will take and pay for the rental from September, even though we'll only be here in December. So the place is empty, right? So we're not messing anything up. We're paying September, October, November, December. And there's a guarantee for you. If you want 2 months, I think they just ask for a month in advance, which I think is the bond anyway. So it was low risk, really. We weren't in the place. We had signed it, and that's how we managed to secure it. So when we arrived, we went straight to our place. Although, actually, no, we didn't because our container hadn't arrived yet. So we went to my in-laws until the container arrived.
So what did you bring in your suitcase?
We brought half a container, and 3/4 of that container was kids' stuff because they were 6 and 9 at the time. We thought they would need all of these sentimental things to try and help them settle in. In reality, they didn't, and we paid money and we stored it for 6 months in a Kennards over here. only to try and get rid of it. And that's another story about trying to get rid of things here in Australia. It wasn't very easy. And yeah, we sold everything, more for pragmatic reasons. One is because we didn't know what we were going to come to. We had a big house, as we do in South Africa, because you can afford it there. And so we didn't think all of that furniture would be able to fit. And we knew we were coming to a 2-bedroom apartment anyway, so we couldn't bring it. And so we sold everything. And slowly over time, as we moved, we've replaced all of those things. So that's physically talking about what's in my suitcase. I guess metaphorically and less literally, we left everything behind. I think the reason why took so long for us to move is because I gave up most family connections. So my parents, I left my brothers, I left my friends. And while she left her friends, she arrived to her father, mother, brother, sister, grandmother, all of her aunts on the one side, all of her cousins on the one side. They all left Pretoria like 20 years before us. So there was, I guess, a soft landing for her and a bigger call for her to come. It made more sense for her. But I'd resolved that this was the right thing to do for my kids. And so
how did the kids experience it? Your kids, how were they with the move?
Yeah, so they were pretty good. I was unemployed probably for about 6 months while I looked for a job here. However, that meant that I was present for 6 months for my kids as they started school. So walked them to school in the morning and was there when the final bell rang, walked them home, was present for bath times and dinner times. When they had soccer or netball, I was there and I took them. So I think that helped. And so that's a silver lining for being present and being unemployed. And I think it did help them settle in and maybe taking a career break, so to speak. My son, who's now 14, he's spent more time in Australia than he has in South Africa. So for a large part, I guess it's a lot of what they know. He doesn't have massive memories of South Africa, and my daughter as well, even though we've been back a few times, a handful of times, to see my parents and my family. But for all intents and purposes, they settled in fairly well. They went through it, they made some friends. The school was very inclusive and very welcoming of them, because obviously it's not the first time they've seen someone come from another country into the system, and gave them whatever support they needed. So it was really very welcoming for them.
I think you touched on that. Your wife had all her family already, but not you. And how was that for you?
Yeah, thankfully, I guess I get on really well with that side of the family. My wife and I have been together for many years, so I knew them before they left for Australia. At family gatherings, I didn't feel like an outsider. I was very much welcomed, as blood relatives would be. So from that perspective, really good. I don't know if it's different for husbands and wives or men and women. I'm close to my family, but for as long as I could remember, I wanted to leave home. And this very much my brothers as well. My eldest brother, as soon as he graduated, he moved to Johannesburg, and very quickly from Johannesburg, he moved to Dallas, Texas for a 2-year secondment. And my middle brother, he got a bursary to go to UCT, and then from UCT he never came back to Port Elizabeth. He went to Johannesburg to work, and then from there he went to the United States, where he's been also for almost over 20 years now. And so moving actually wasn't that much of a big step for me to take, and for my wife it would have been. So that's why I think her coming here to her family was a big thing for her mentally. I've met many friends couples from South Africa who say, we'd love to come, but my wife would rather. Her parents are there, they're getting elderly, she needs to look after them, those kinds of things. So that's holding them back to do that.
And your parents, how did they feel about the move?
Look, I think they're pretty used to us all leaving anyway, flying the coop. For as long as I can remember, my father would always say, you'll understand it when you have kids, but rather try and explore where you can to go somewhere else where maybe it's a little bit safer and the opportunities potentially could be bigger for them. I didn't really listen to it, because by then when he was telling me and I was listening, I wasn't a father then. But when I became a father, those words rang true. And so they're very happy for us. I'm pretty certain, as I am now a father and my daughter's almost getting to uni years, where she potentially may leave home, I'm pretty certain they were pretty sad about it, and still are, because the physical contact is minimal because we don't get to see each other, and they're not going to travel, and it's not always that easy for us to get back. But they're supportive for the most part for us being here.
Yeah. So John, you said that you stayed at home and took a career break.
Yeah.
And then after 6 months, what did you do? You found some employment. What was that?
Yeah, so I think once I got the kids in, I joke about it now. There was one spot in a coffee shop in the neighborhood that I would go sit every morning after I dropped the kids off. And I would sit on my laptop and look for jobs and tailor cover letters, tailor CVs. In the beginning, I was very choosy, like the first month or two, because I thought maybe, I don't want to say arrogantly, but maybe it was. Look at all these jobs. I can do all of these things. I come from blue chip companies and I've got all these qualifications. I'm not going to go for that one. I'm going to go for these other ones. But that was a cycle that repeated itself over a couple of months, sitting in the coffee shop applying. And obviously the number of applications would go up as desperation went up. So getting to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 applications a day. And so that would continue. But then eventually I got an opportunity to interview for a role at CBA through my wife's connections. So it wasn't even, yes, it played a role, but it really was the network that got me the door to meet a human, because previously sending CVs, I'd hardly got to speak to a human. I just got automated responses if I did get a response to job applications, which was part of the problem because that was doing my head in a little bit. Give me something to work with at least. What am I doing wrong? Anyway, so that process with CBA took 3 months and 7 interviews, including 2 case study presentations, hearing on a Friday that they're going to offer me on Monday, and then not hearing anything on Monday, inquiring on Wednesday, finding out that whole team had been retrenched the Friday afternoon to where it was so close. And then I was like, man, this can't be it. And I went back again to the recruiter and said, listen, I heard you guys were about to hire me, so therefore I have skills that you want. There's got to be something else. And so going through another set of 6 interviews and finally landing on a job, which in hindsight was not the right job. It was really me going, man, I need to get into the market. Man, I've got to pay some bills. I need to get this, what they call Australian experience. And then finding myself in a situation after 2 weeks where in the job, so this was July 2018, where I was like, wow, it's good to earn money, but this can't be why I came here. What I was doing wasn't what I thought I was going to do. And then inevitably, there's some personality clashes with the manager because I'm unhappy, then she gets unhappy. And that cycle just got worse over the next 5 months, to the point where I had a discussion with my wife and said, listen, this is not why I should be employed, and this is not why I'm here. It's not what I want. So I resigned just before my probation period ended. So by December 2018, I was unemployed again, back on the job market, because December, January, everything goes quiet. So I took a month or 2 to reset and then started again.
That's a tough gig that you were in for a year now. And so now in a year, you really haven't settled as an individual in your own kind of professional life, right?
Yeah, and I think that's quite profound, Anton, because I think everything else was great. So we had a roof over our head. My wife was working at a good job, so we could pay some bills. My kids were happy. We were in a beautiful city. But there was one thing missing, which is, and I don't want to say it is my self-worth or my identity. What you do for a career is a big part of who you are in your life, like it or not, right? Because, and it's not just about the money. It's about the sense of achievement and the things that you get to do during the daylight hours that are of worth to you, to other people, and things like that. And I was searching for it. And that was the one piece I think that was missing from me truly settling in.
So Ben wouldn't, I'm asking this question, but I'll ask it anyway because I'm a human condition person. So what did you learn about yourself during that time, John?
I think so for one thing, I think, and I'm not shy to admit it now, but I think I needed to find some help. So I went to see a psychologist for the first time in my life, and she helped me to bring closure to that chapter, that first year, through many things. However, she also helped me get perspective, right? So yes, I didn't have 100% of the things that I was looking for to help me settle in, but 80% of the things were there. My wife, for the first time in her life, could come home on her own before the sun goes down. And when I mean on her own, she's walking in the street to the train station, which she couldn't do in South Africa. She's had many of these horror stories as well. Thankfully, nothing hectic, but close calls in South Africa when she's coming home, having spent late night at work, as you do. All of those kinds of things, right? Like, we weren't destitute. The kids were happy. My wife was happy. This is just one thing of many things in a step on life. And I think you asked me what I learned about myself. I always used to say I'm quite resilient, and this was testing me, right? So it's like, how thick is your skin? How tough are you really to get over these things, to pull yourself out of moments where you go, am I good enough? Because that's the kind of conversations that I was having, because I was getting all these rejections or no calls back from recruiters after putting all this effort into doing these CVs and cover letters. And it plays on your mind, where actually it shouldn't, because previously 20 years in your career, you've had a career of achievements. You've worked and done things, but yet in the space of 1 year, suddenly you're like questioning all of those kinds of things.
Am I good enough? Can I do this? And what changed for you? So what in the environment, I'm not talking about, so I can hear your inner resilience that you had, and you were seeking help when you needed to, which is a very smart thing to do and very self-aware. But what in the environment, in the Australian environment, is it that helped you along, that says, okay, I can make it here?
Yep. So I think in that time, so from January 2018, when I was back in the job market, I decided that I wasn't just going to blindly apply for roles. I was going to try and network more. So I reached out to as many people as I'd met in that first year, through schools, through sporting events, and said, look, is there someone in these companies or in these roles that I'm looking for that you can introduce me to? I also reached out to my South African network and said, is there anybody that I can speak to? And I did that because I realized that's one of the ways that could shortcut me and get me into a corporate role, because that's what I thought I was going to go for again. And so I had many coffee chats over January to June to meet people and just put myself out there. In that time, however, I also met some business people, some entrepreneurs, some people who previously worked in corporate and then moved into the corporate world. And in speaking to them, because previously in South Africa, I had a couple of side hustle businesses that I started while I was working in corporate, with the aim of, if this goes off, then I can move there, and because that's what I really want to do. And I realized firstly, two things. One, the support and that is given to SMEs in terms of grants, government grants, and the ease at which to get an ABN or a business number and register a business is a lot easier in Australia than it was in South Africa. So that's one. And the second thing is really the economy is bigger here. And actually the SME market, which is businesses that are less than 50 million, are almost 2/3 of the economy. So that means there are many people out there, many businesses that are out there that make up this economy. Where I come from in South Africa, that's not the case. And so that was positive for me, to the point where in September of 2019, where I decided, okay, nothing much is happening for me here. Let me hire myself and have a crack at this entrepreneur thing that I wanted to do anyway, because there's nothing to lose, really, and only everything to gain.
So what did you do?
Yeah.
What was your journey?
So I think it was almost like a chance call to an agency that was my agency when I worked at South African Breweries. So it was a brand design agency, so basically it does graphic design. And I'd always been really friendly with one of the co-founders. And at that stage, again, September 2019, I reached out to him and said, look, why don't we think about a partnership here between us, where you maintain all the creative staff that's sitting in Cape Town in your head office that had been there for 20 years, because the business has been going for that long. And I'll win work on this side through this networking thing that I'm doing now with people that I know and my network around the world. And we'll just send business back there and we can give really good experience. And so that's what we did. And that was the business, which really started off in, I think, February 2020. And we all know what 2020 was.
I just want to say that's about COVID month, isn't it?
Yeah, April, I think we shut down. March. Yeah.
So how was that period when you just started up and then COVID hit? How did you manage that?
Yeah, I think I joke because remember there used to be Job Seeker and Job Keeper and those kinds of things. I joke that was my largest client for that first couple of months and year. But really what it gave me the opportunity to do was just sit back, because that's all it could do, because you had to sit back in wherever you were living at that time. and just take stock of the business, understand it a bit more, understand the market, understand who I was going to target, get the strategy on point. So I used it to good effect, I think. Obviously, I was itching to go, so was just reaching out to people where I could to see what interest. And I actually did win some business during that time. Interestingly, if there's a positive that came out of COVID was it made the idea of having a remote workforce more acceptable, because that's what we were, right? We had a workforce that was sitting in Cape Town. And here we were winning clients in Australia, in Asia, and in Europe. So we didn't physically need to have to be present, which is very much how agencies work with their clients. The clients always want to go see your boardroom and they want to understand chemistry in person and those kinds of things, where in this new age of working, that's not going to happen anymore. So that silver lining played in our hands. And yeah, for that first year and a half, it was terrible, but it was terrible for everybody. So I just sat on my hands and had patience.
That's great. And so you survived over this time and you got used to this now and being an entrepreneur, and you've been that now for 6 or 7 years now, right?
Yeah, 6 years, just over 5, 6 years. And there's been many evolutions of it as I look of businesses that I've explored, really just looking for the thing that works. And I think one of the revelations that I've had as an entrepreneur is, especially in a country where it's almost 2/3 of the market, is I think certainly when I grew up, everyone thought that an entrepreneur was going to be like Bill Gates or Elon Musk or those people who have really made it. You're going to be rich and you're going to be successful and you're going to build these empires. When actually entrepreneurship and business ownership is actually just another career choice. There's pros and cons. You might not be a multi-millionaire, but there are other pros, and just normalize the fact that entrepreneurship is not necessarily you're going to become the next Bill Gates or something like that.
Or then it is a good point. And then one day two blokes talk to each other and say, we need to create a podcast, and here we are.
Exactly.
That's entrepreneurship, right?
Yeah.
So we are rushing towards the end here, and you've got such a fascinating story and twists and turns that I did not think and anticipate at all, John. And so the power of storytelling and so on. But I'm very interested to hear what are your kind of key thoughts about somebody that is walking this path that you're walking. There's plenty of people in here trying to set up entrepreneurial businesses and so on, and then people that want to come across. And what are your kind of key advice to some of these people?
Yeah, so look, I think the first thing that comes to mind is obviously there's going to be a culture shock. And I don't mean culture shock like it's so vastly different from South Africa. I think it's just a different way of doing things, and people have a different way of things because that's the definition of culture. And I've seen South Africans who have upped sticks after a couple of years, 5 or 6 years, because they couldn't settle in. And I think in many ways they weren't open to the fact that things are different, and they yearn for the way it was in South Africa, and they're naively thinking that I wish I could take what I had there, the best of South Africa, the best of my experiences, and combine it with the best of Australia. And it doesn't work like that. And I think you have to have an open mind that things are different, and you need to accept it where you, of course, to help you settle in. And I think, like one of my good friends told me, it took him probably 5 years to settle in. And I think that number of years is different for everybody because all your circumstances are different. Am I fully settled? I don't think so. I'm 8 years in. I've got some good friends who said they were settled in after 2 years. And I know some people who after 20 years are leaving Australia to go back to Cape Town because they never, ever felt that the pull of what they know.
What is the thing that make people, in your opinion, that make it easier for people to settle? I know you say accept that it's not the same, but what is it that they do?
I think for me, I can only speak from my own experience. And I think there were a couple of things for me that I had to check because I'm quite pragmatic. So there's a couple of check boxes. One, are my kids and my wife happy? And visibly so, yes, check. Are we living to a standard that we want to and that is acceptable to us? That doesn't mean we're living in the biggest neighborhoods or whatever. Check. And then I think from a personal point of view, one, is there career satisfaction? And two, do you have a network of friends and family around you so that you can feel part of something? And that something might be a football community, it might be a school group where they invite you to their house, they invite you to drinks, to a pub or something like that. So you're part of something and you're not just on your own. Because if you're on your own, you're left with your own thoughts, and that can be a dangerous place to be. And you need to be able to get yourself into those circumstances where you're out there and you're part of somebody's circle or a part of a circle.
Yeah, that's very wise words. I think that, and also going back to your story, I think that first year that you leveled the whole thing for you. You were a senior person in breweries, you were a senior person in South Africa and coming here, and somehow the things don't work, and that's a big leveler. And you discovered that, and that's a good story, because you said, okay, if this doesn't work, I'm going to try something else. And I think you were the master of your journey, in the sense that you said, if I can't get the work satisfaction, then I can't have a home life. I'll be a miserable person. And so you said, I can't do that, and go find something else. And so that's a good story.
Yeah, and that first year was humbling. All this journey has been humbling. I think that's a great point that you've just made. But not humbling in a bad way. I think you've got to grow from it and learn from it. And those people that are looking to get back into corporate, the reality is that maybe you have to take 1 or 2 steps back to get into the market. It's a very competitive market. There are people from all over the world that have our qualifications, that have worked in big companies just like you and me, and they're here as well. So they're also looking. Have some patience and back yourself, that you will work your way back to where you feel you deserve, or to that point where you will have that moment of, okay, I can breathe now, I can settle in now, and we're okay.
Yeah. Any last thoughts from you, Ben, before I close this?
No, not really. I think I absolutely thoroughly enjoyed this chat. Really enjoyed listening to you tonight and listening to what you've done and gone through. I'm really inspired by it. You've done really well. So many opportunities to give up and let it get the better of you, but the fact that you just persevered and focused on the positive, that's amazing, man. Yeah, thanks for coming on. Thanks for having a chat with us. Thanks for sharing. I know it's not always easy, because you don't always want to delve into the tough times and stuff, but you did, and I think there's a lot of people that can take a lot of positive things of what you said, and I think that's great. Thanks.
No, and I appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you, John. Really appreciate it. There's so many things that inspired me tonight, and I'm sure many people that will listen to you. So thank you for your time. Really appreciate that. It's a great episode.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.